in the northwest.
This is Lunchtime Agenda.
Hello and welcome to Lunchtime Agenda. I'm Laura Jays, and just 24 hours, or less than 24 hours before the polls open in Western Australia, well, things have got a little bit interesting. There's a curveball there for the Labor Party in the form of its star candidate Joe Bullock. Our political reporter David Lipson has been following the campaign. David, what is going on and how much will this damage Labor?
Well, Laura, good afternoon. It's the second curveball for the Labor Party here in WA in just 2 days. Yesterday, it was the revelation that Joe Bullock had a conviction recorded against him for common assault back in 1996. Today, it was a speech that he delivered in November last year when he was already the Senate candidate. In fact, at that point, he had been elected, if you like, to the Senate before the rerun happened. This speech was delivered to a dinner that was organised by a Christian group. Now, Joe Bullock is very much a member of the right and was and still is a union official, a high-ranking one for the shop assistants union. But this speech was pretty extraordinary, you'd have to say, because he did a number of things. Firstly, he admitted that he has not always voted for the party that he is on the #1 spot and the ticket for, the Labor Party. He was asked about this today. This is what he said.
I didn't vote Labor in 1975. I joined the Labor Party in 1978. I've supported the Labor Party ever since.
He also, in that speech, described the ALP as an untrustworthy party full of mad members and launched a stinging attack at the #2 on the Senate ticket, that is Louise Pratt, and said that she was a poster child for some left issues like gay marriage, and also accused her of canvassing votes against him. She was standing right at his shoulder at that news conference earlier today. This is what she said.
Joe and I are members of the Labor Party for good reason. We've got a lot more in common than we would ever have that's different, and that's because we both want to champion, the rights of ordinary West Australians.
So a united front from the 1 and 2 on the Labor ticket today. They were both handing out how to vote cards at a school outside of the Perth inner centre. But the Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, says this is just proof that the Labor Party in WA is hopelessly divided.
There is division and dysfunction at the heart of the West Australian Labor Senate team. It's proof from deep within the Labor Party that the Labor Party is simply not up to the job of government. And I'm hoping that the voters of Western Australia are sufficiently engaged to be paying attention to this.
So this may end up being the difference, to answer your question about how this will affect things in WA, the difference between whether Louise Pratt makes it into the Senate or not, because Joe Bullock is #1 on the ticket. He's assured of a spot in the Senate, but Louise Pratt less likely. So interestingly, although the attention has been on him, it won't really affect his run at the Senate. The other thing to mention is that there's less at stake for Labor, you'd have to say, in WA because, well, they don't hold government at a federal level, whereas for the Liberals, they hold government, and every extra senator that they can secure will make it easier for Tony Abbott to get his legislative agenda through the Parliament, because at the moment, no matter what happens in July, Tony Abbott is not going to hold the balance of power. He's going to have to rely on micro parties to get his agenda through. It's just a case of how many of them.
Thanks, David. Now to our panel today on Lunchtime Agenda. In Brisbane, joining me is Labor MP Graham Perrott, and from Melbourne today, Liberal MP Dan Tehan. Now, Graham, first to you. Obviously, well, I'll ask you first. Do these comments sit comfortably with you from Joe Bullock? He has to go, doesn't he?
Well, the Labor Party's always been a broad church, and obviously Joe sits right over on the far right of the church, and perhaps Louise sits on the left. But church still needs walls to be steady, and I think Joe will look at that record of fighting for in the last 36 years since he's been in the Labor Party, fighting for the people in the shops, the retail industry, fighting on their behalf, and he'll bring that to the Australian Senate, and I'm sure he'll do a good job.
But obviously you don't condone his comments, and are they hard for you to sit here and know that he's your number one star candidate in Western Australia, something that your leader has said is a very important election?
Oh, look, it is an important election. Now, Western Australia's got that long history of turning out your Wilson Tuckies, and I think the current member for Dennis Jansen, the member for Tangney's sort of drifted way out there into cuckoo land as well in terms of representing the Liberal Party. But the reality is the Labor Party has a long history in the West of looking after the interests of ordinary Australians, ordinary Western Australians, and those Labor Party values are what Joe has signed on for, irrespective of how he voted 36 years ago before he'd even joined the Labor Party.
All right, Dan Tehan, 75 votes also cast at an aged care home yesterday were declared invalid. Does the AEC need an overhaul here after its recent history in WA? It's not exactly going to instill confidence in voters tomorrow, is it?
Well, no, it's not, and let's hope that the rest of the election goes smoothly, because it wasn't a great start. Obviously, the reason why the Western Australians are going back to the ballot box tomorrow is because of an error which was made at the last election. So I think we all hope that the AEC does its job professionally, gets it right, and we can get a result, and then we can move on to governing the country.
Clive Palmer has also outspent the major parties by millions of dollars. Some reports say 10 to 1, 20 to 1. Dan Tehan, how does the coalition need to manage Clive Palmer and the Palmer United Party?
Well, the most important thing is for us is to concentrate on the election and making sure that we put our case to the voters. We've got to make sure that they understand that if they vote Liberal, they're voting for the end of the carbon tax, the end of the mining tax, for restoring jobs and prosperity to the economy. And that's what we've got to focus on. I think Clive Palmer, people are starting to see through him. He's very much a one-trick pony. And but I think for us, it's just important that we're out there articulating our case as to why Western Australians should vote for us tomorrow.
And Graham Perrott, I wanted to ask you about, it seems to be a growing movement within the Labor Party, at least by some, that the party needs to move away from the union movement. Do you think Joe Bullock's history might play a role in that sense in tomorrow's vote?
Look, I don't know Joe, so I don't know of his comments on this, but personally, I have always been a strong believer in the Labor Party closely representing the interests of the labour movement, the LABOUR movement. I think that even though the union percentage of workers at the coalface in unions has decreased, union values and union benefits affect an incredible number of Australians. I know we're moving to subcontractors, I know we're moving to less secure work, but that's why the Labor movement, with the Labor Party being the political arm of the Labor movement, the role is even more important.
And Dan Tehan, I wanted to ask you about one of the major things that has been a part of Labor's campaign in the West, and we heard it again today. They're warning against what the Liberal Party might do to penalty rates. Now, this is something you've advocated for change in this area. How difficult is it politically, and do you regret that this might be a hindrance for the Liberal Party in Western Australia?
Well, no, look, Laura, what I said was we need to have a discussion about this issue, because at the moment what we're seeing is that businesses aren't opening, especially on a Sunday, so therefore the businesses are missing out and the workers are missing out on employment. And what I called for was for us to have a mature discussion on this issue so that we could ensure that businesses were opening on Sundays in particular, therefore employing people, so that you were getting a win-win situation. And I think we do need to have that discussion. But
the mature discussion isn't happening, is it? And do you blame your side of politics, or do you blame the Labor side?
Well, look, I think probably fault lies, on both sides. What we have to do, though, is to make sure that we do have a mature discussion. We've got to walk away from this idea that as soon as we sort of say, look, we need to make sure that the laws we've got in place encourage businesses to employ people, that we've got to be able to have a mature discussion around that, because at the moment, especially when it comes to young Australians who are, there is double the number of young people who are unemployed at the moment that there is mature workers. We've got to make sure the policy settings are right so that those young people are getting work.
Graham Perrett, there's also been a discussion or calls for a mature discussion around GST. Martin Parkinson, Ken Henry, Cass Goldie, the latest to add her voice to that discussion. Why not have at least a discussion about it?
Look, happy to have a discussion. I think Chris Bowen is on the record as saying we're happy to have the discussion, but our position is also pretty clear. Now, the Liberal Party seems to be hiding from this discussion at the moment, sending out some shadow spokespeople. It's the first time in years that I haven't seen Joe Hockey for 2 days. He sends out someone to say a few words about the GST.
But you say your position is clear on it, but you're still happy to have the discussion. It's either one or the other, isn't it?
Well, no, our position is that we can have a general discussion about tax. That's what we have to do that.
But not specifically on raising the GST or broadening its base.
Well, our position on broadening the base has been clear since 1998. Okay, so this is not something that we're just going to flick and change just because there's an election coming up. We've been committed to the concerns about the GST. We believe if we broaden the base, it's going to attack Middle Australia in particular. That's not the way to approach this. But happy to have a broader discussion about tax and look at some of the recommendations from the Henry review.
Okay, Dan Tehan, you wrote a column today. I'll let you respond, Dan Tehan, but I also wanted to add in this question. You wrote a column today asking for the tough decisions to be made for our kids. You identified education, health, tax to all be looked at, but you didn't give any specific examples. I don't suppose you want to give those specific examples now, do you?
Well, could I just go back to Graham's point? The trouble is, when we talk about taxation reform, and we do need taxation reform in the country, the Labor Party just continually roll out the GST scare campaign. So, Graham, if we're going to have a mature discussion, let's say, OK, let's wait and see. Let's have the taxation review. Let's see what it comes up with, and then let's talk about what we need. Because at the moment, the nation's expenditure is far outweighing its revenue, and we do have to, for the sake of our children, if for nothing else, make sure that we get the budget back into surplus and we start paying down our debt. Otherwise, we are leaving future generations with the task that we should be undertaking, and that's wrong.
Dan, your leader and senior ministers have made it very, very clear. I'm only repeating what they have said, that there'll be no changes to the GST. So I'm only repeating what your colleagues have said, what your leaders, your ministers have said.
Dan, just quickly, would you ask Joe Hockey, Tony Abbott to rethink their position on the GST?
No, well, we will have the taxation review, and then what has been made clear is that any recommendations which come out of that review will be taken to the Australian people, and no changes will be made unless it has the endorsement of the Australian people. So let's wait and have the taxation review. There was a scare campaign rolled out before the last election trying to get us to rule out various taxes as part of the review. We withstood that, and so let's have the review and then let's have the discussion. If for no other reason, it's for our children and future generations, because we cannot continue to live live in a way where we're expending a lot more than we're earning.
Okay, Dan Tehan, Graham Perrett, it's always a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining me on Lunchtime Agenda today. A quick break here on the program. Then when we return...